About a month after their independence referendum, the, still for the moment, Soviet Republic of Georgia was hit by a violent earthquake right on the boundary between Georgia proper and South Ossetia. A magnitude 7 tremor, it was the most powerful earthquake ever recorded in the Caucasus Mountains at the time. With rescue efforts hampered by the ongoing and occasionally armed tensions between Georgian and South Ossetian authorities, both of whom claimed jurisdiction, 270 were killed and approximately 100,000 left homeless. And a few days after the quake, the regional government in Skan Valley announced it would separate from Georgia and seek unification with Russian-ruled North Ossetia, a situation which threatened to turn low-level if nasty ethnic violence into a full-blown civil war. Angola's own civil war, which had been raging as a Cold War proxy since 1975, seemed finally to be coming to an end meanwhile, as the two sides, the ruling MPLA, supported by Cuba and the USSR, and rivals UNITA, supported by South Africa and Zaire, and indirectly by the USA, met at the resort of Estoril in Portugal to thrash out a peace agreement. President José Eduardo dos Santos and his opposite number Jonas Savimbi, under the chairmanship of Portuguese Foreign Minister José Manuel Barroso, and with observers from the US and USSR, agreed to have an independently monitored multi-party election in September 1992, and in the meantime to demobilise the 150,000 or so armed militia across the country. The Eurovision Song Contest was held at Rome's famous Cinecittà studio, following Toto Cutugno's win the previous year, and he and 1964 winner Gigliola Cinquetti were chosen as hosts. But there were some serious difficulties. The venue had been switched from Sanremo to Rome late on, the orchestra was distinctly under-rehearsed, there were a number of technical glitches, and the hosts only spoke Italian, which led to a rather chaotic voting segment which dragged on and on, even more than usual, as the hosts constantly had to ask the juries to repeat themselves and ask the organisers for clarification. And after all of that, the scoring ended in a two-way tie. France's entry C'est le dernier qui a parlé qui a raison, sung by Amina, and Sweden's Fångad av en stormvind by Carola both ended on 146 points. Both had been given the same number of maximum 12 points too, so it came down to the number of 10-point awards, which gave Sweden the win. Last year's contest had been held in Zagreb among ethnic tensions and calls for independence, and Yugoslavia wasn't getting any calmer, but Red Star Belgrade pulled off a shock defeat of German giants Bayern Munich to reach the final of the European Cup, the most prestigious competition in European football. A 90th-minute own goal by Bayern defender Klaus Augenthaler proving decisive. Red Star would play French side Olympique de Marseille in Bari at the end of May. Neither team had ever reached the final, much less lifted the trophy before. And in the home of Marseille's great rivals Monaco, meanwhile the Principality was preparing for the annual Grand Prix weekend, and the circuit had been resurfaced in the intervening year to smooth out some of the bumps, though ironically a few days before the race a burst water pipe in the HQ of the Automobile Club of Monaco left a nasty ripple in some of the newly laid asphalt. It wasn't smooth going for Ferrari either. Following the Imola debacle, it had been time for the annual Mugello Fan Day, where the tifosi were invited to watch their heroes put the cars through their paces as the highlight. What was normally a celebration had a distinctly sour note this year, as not only had the team underperformed even before its embarrassment in front of the home fans, but lead driver Prost and the management seemed to be pretty much openly feuding by this point, with Alain making it clear he was only at Mugello because his contract said so, and taking aim at the quote-unquote pathetic Italian sporting press into the bargain. And then it rained. And Alain Prost spun off on a puddle and hit a concrete wall. The tifosi didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The hero worship of Prost as he joined Ferrari at the end of 1989 suddenly seemed a long time ago indeed. A week later, on his way to Monaco, team manager Cesare Fiorio was summoned to Fiat HQ in Turin to be read the riot act by Gianni Agnelli. The results on the track were bad enough, but he was definitely getting tired of reading about constant public fighting between driver and team. An immediate improvement on both counts was expected. It was a significant race for McLaren too, much as Ron Dennis made his usual protests about it being just another race. It was a quarter-century earlier, in May 1966, that Bruce McLaren had first driven the car bearing his name, and this would be the team's 350th race. Not only that, but if Senna won, or Berger, come to that, it would be the team's 90th victory. Ron Dennis may not set much store by such records, but others did, and at any rate, he wanted to win every race. Either Senna or Prost had won every year since 1984, in fact, and it would be a brave man who bet on Alain in 1991, so Ayrton was definitely the favourite, but Williams and Nigel Mansell were keen to end his domination of the Principality. Frank Williams had responded to criticism of Nigel's performance compared to his number 2, Patrese, by saying that Nigel was definitely quicker than Ricciardo and would hit his stride soon, but that having Ricciardo motivated to do even better was no bad thing either. Bernard Dudot, meanwhile, had provided the team with a V10 Renault specially configured for Monaco, and Patrick Head had insisted that this time, the gearbox would do as it was told. Guy Ligier, meanwhile, desperate for something nice to say at the first French-speaking race of the year, was singing the praises of Thierry Boutsen's work ethic and positive attitude, but Thierry himself must have been looking at the Williams FW14 with more than a twinge of regret that he wasn't the one driving it. And so to pre-qualifying, where normal service was resumed, with the Jordans and Delaras going through without too much bother. Gasho slowest of the four, but still a full 1.1 seconds ahead of Larini, best of the rest, in the Lambo that really didn't suit the circuit. Pedro Chavez, in his first taste of Monaco, did well just to get off the bottom of the timing sheets in his inadequate machinery, thanks to Olivier Gouillard's continued teething troubles with the new Fonmetal. Martin Brundle managed to get himself disqualified from the event in Thursday's first practice session by missing a weight check, while Caffey sat out the session having the gearbox on his FA12 fixed, and Senna and Berger topped the charts. Saturday saw most drivers improve their times, though, with Senna flying around in 1 minute 20.344 to beat his own record time, set in the 1987 actively sprung Turbo Lotus. But Berger didn't improve, and Senna would line up alongside Stefano Modena in the Stuka-nosed Tyrrell, shades of Phoenix 1989 when Alesi had given him a real race on the street circuit. Patrese was third, and then Piquet, who'd really got the new Benetton under him now, with Mansell fifth and Berger sixth. The Ferraris could only manage seventh and ninth, sandwiching Moreno's second Benetton, with De Cesaris breaking the top 10 in the Jordan once more. Nakajima in the second Tyrrell was 11th, and nearly 2.5 seconds off his teammate. Then came the Delaras and Martini, the Leighton House cars 15th and 18th and complaining of bad handling, Tarquini a creditable 20th in the AGS, Blundell keeping the Brabham flag flying in 22nd at his first Monaco event of any kind, Gasho a disappointed 24th ahead of Alboreto, still suffering 2 broken ribs from his prang at Imola, and Hakkinen, who found the understeering Lotus a handful. Alboreto's teammate Caffey, meanwhile, had a horrific crash at the swimming pool, caught by the security cameras, that tore his shiny new Footwork FA12 into 3 pieces. Alex, dazed and a bit dog-eared but not seriously hurt, was unable to set a time and would take no further part, which was probably just as well. He was joined on the pit wall by Julian Bailey, a full 2.2 seconds off the back of the grid after his Imola heroics, and young Babazza. Ken Tyrrell was all smiles before the race, confidently predicting that a win was on the cards, and joking that he'd even seen Stefano Modena crack a smile, huge if true. Prost was fastest in the Sunday morning warm-up, which improved his and Ferrari's mood a bit, and under sunny skies they all lined up for the start. The lights went green and off they went, with Senna holding on to the lead through Saint-Devote with Modena behind, while in the melee behind them Berger nudged Piquet just hard enough to derange his front wing and break the Benetton suspension, which put Piquet out further round the lap and sent the Austrian in for a new nose. Nelson might not be a fan of Monaco, but even he might be a bit annoyed at being taken out so early on, with a promising car under him that he had still to do 3 racing laps in. So Senna led Modena, then Patrese and Mansell, Prost and Alesi and Moreno, chased by De Cesaris, Leto and Nakajima. The top 4 were already pulling away from the Ferraris, with Modena doing well to keep in touch with Senna using the V10 version of the Honda engine that Senna apparently preferred over his own V12. Stefano, of course, had form at Monaco, having come third in his Brabham in 1989, while Alesi had been second in the Tyrrell last year, and today was Stefano's 28th birthday, so he was hoping to do well. Senna began to ease away a little after Modena made a tiny mistake, while Prost drew back up to Mansell's rear wing. Senna nearly hit a marshal who picked just the wrong moment to cross the track. That man needs his brains testing, as BBC commentator Murray Walker put it, and behind them, De Cesaris in 7th was harrying Alesi for the last point. Berger, charging hard to catch up, hit a wall on lap 9 thanks to an oil-smeared visor, about the same time as Tarquini pulled in to retire in the pits with gearbox woes, And just a few laps later, as Capelli retired with dud brakes on lap 13, Senna was already among the backmarkers. Martini almost coming to a dead stop trying to get out of Modna's way, but then managing to hold up both Williamses and Prost thanks to a gearbox gremlin that was making him accelerate very slowly out of corners. The Alesi de Cesaris battle got past with less trouble and continued going at it hammer and tongs. An interesting combination of a young charger in a venerable historic team and an old charger in a brand new team. That was the only real action on the track, at least until the Jordan's throttle cable went ping on lap 22, which put him out. Mansell was having throttle problems of his own, a faulty sensor that had already led to his engine cutting out twice. Luckily for him, this was Monaco, and not only was it hilly enough for Nigel to be able to bump start the car, but it was narrow enough to keep Prost behind him. By now, Senna was maintaining a gap of about 3 seconds over Modena, who was in turn relatively untroubled by Patresi's Williams. Suzuki's brakes failed and he ended up nose first in the tyre wall at Saint-Devote on lap 25, and shortly afterwards, and off-camera, Prost inveigled his way past a stuttering Mansell to take fourth and set off in pursuit of Patrese, leaving Mansell behind to the tune of 4 seconds a lap. Modena followed Senna through another group of traffic, which was all bunched up behind Martini, still struggling to get moving out of corners and holding everyone up. Behind the Minardis were Pirro and Nakajima, who made a mistake trying to take Martini coming out of the tunnel and spun to a standstill with his teammate going rocketing past at the Nouvelle chicane. Unfortunately, this meant that when Pirro next looked in his mirrors, he saw a black and white Tyrrell with a white helmet in the cockpit, assumed it was still Nakajima, and proceeded to, as he thought, vigorously defend his position, while still trying to get past Martini. The blue flags were being displayed, of course, but Pirro assumed they were telling Martini to get out of his way, and all the while Patrese was bearing down on the frustrated Modena. Half-distance came and went as Pirro and Modena finally disposed of Martini, but by now Patrese had made up the 12-second gap to Modena within 3 laps. Eventually, the Tyrrell team sent someone down to Scuderia Italia garage to ask what the devil their man was playing at. The misunderstanding was sorted out and Pirro got smartly out of the way, but the damage was done. Senna was 20 seconds up the road, and Patrese, from being 12 seconds behind, was tucked up under Stefano's rear wing. A fuming Modena put his foot down to try and pull away from Patrese, but the veteran wasn't going to be left behind and we could at least enjoy a fine scrap for second. Or not, because just a couple of laps later, both went into the tunnel together and Modena's engine let go, dumping oil all over the track, which Patrese, doing 160 miles an hour, couldn't really avoid hitting, and bounced off the Armco, bringing his own race to an end too. And at the same time, Alboreto pulled over 3 laps behind them already with a less spectacular engine failure, while unseen, Mark Blundell also came a cropper on Modena's oil and spun out at the chicane. So, Modena inconsolable, Patrese philosophical, and Prost into second, with Mansell third, then Alesi, Moreno and Leto in the top 6. Mansell's throttle seemed to have sorted itself out a bit as he put up the fastest lap just after his teammate's exit. Prost bullied his way past Martini, and not long afterwards Piero became the first driver in F1 history to be given a 10-second stop-go penalty, a new rule this year. Martini peeled in, waited for 10 seconds in the weighing area, and off he went again, though the TV director decided instead to watch Boutsen circulating in the Ligier in 8th. Mansell, meanwhile, now had the bit between his teeth again, setting a series of fastest laps in pursuit of Prost, who was by now some 40 seconds behind Senna. Prost was catching Senna by a second or so a lap, but nonetheless, unless the Brazilian did something stupid, like, say, losing concentration and stuffing it in a barrier, or had a technical problem, he wasn't in any real danger of losing the lead. By lap 60 of the 78, Mansell was right behind Prost, and James Hunt was wondering aloud if, given his season so far, he'd be inclined just to stay behind and safely finish. Not a bit of it, of course, and after following the Ferrari closely for a couple of laps, he dove inside at the Nouvelle chicane, locking his brakes, a brave move at the best of times, never mind with oil on the track there, and took second. Soon Mansell had left Prost behind and Alesi was closing on his team leader. The number 27 Ferrari had a handling problem which turned out to be a slow puncture, meanwhile Senna was bearing down on Alesi to lap him. Hakkinen had an oil leak and dropped out with just under 10 laps to go, and his countryman Leto had to pull in with his gearbox stuck in 6th. No fun at all for Senna at Interlagos and completely unmanageable at Monaco. That put Pirro up into the points instead, as Senna lapped Martini for the 6th time, the chastened Piero waving him through. Senna was cruising by now while a struggling Prost pitted for tyres, but a bodged Ferrari stop in which they dropped the Ferrari onto an air hose and then had to jack it back up again before he could get underway dropped him back to 5th, and he suffered the indignity of being lapped by Senna while in the pits to boot. So Ayrton Senna won his 4th Monaco Grand Prix in 5 years, and his 4th race in a row at a canter, with Mansell following him home for his first points, his first finish in fact, of 1991, followed by Jean Alesi, benefiting from his teammates' woes to take his first podium in Ferrari red. Roberto Moreno was 4th, his first points of the year for Benetton, followed by fuming Prost in 5th, and Emanuele Pirro taking the last point. Boutsen was 7th for the second race in a row, with Eriks, Bernard and Comas following him home. Prost's 2 points nonetheless took him to second in the title race ahead of Berger, with Mansell and Patrese now equal with 1 second-place finish apiece. Senna and McLaren remained utterly dominant though, and while there were rumblings about it being 1988 all over again, Ron Dennis made the point he'd made back then often enough: we're here to win, and it's up to everyone else to catch up. Back across the Atlantic next for the 2-race North American Tour to Canada and Mexico, as the other teams all went back home to see about doing just that.
Into the wonderful.